my passport verified.
Who remembers that movie? Has anybody here seen it? I had to put the subtitle, or the Spanish version. I don't think it was actually released in Colombia ever. But in some Spanish-speaking countries, it was released as Eras por Azar. It was called Sneakers, with Robert Redford. It was in 1992, I think, and probably one of the better movies that talked about how to circumvent security systems in order to get into secure areas. So I want to talk to you today about factors of authentication, and we'll revisit that video again soon to have a look at what factors of authentication we use there. But let's go through some general concepts that we might already know. This talk isn't going to be specific about Python, and there have been a couple of people today and yesterday who've already spoken about polyglottery, or the use of multiple languages. Hands up if you use a language other than Python. About 50, 60%. So a lot of us do use different languages, and we use the right language for the right job. But security and authentication, and as we'll talk about today, biometric security, they apply to any language. They apply to software systems in general. So generally we talk about one of three things when we talk about security. We're probably all already familiar with the something you know. This is like your password, or maybe the PIN number to take money out of the ATM to get cash out. Can anybody name the other two that we often use when we're talking about multi-factor authentication? Something you are, and something you have. So something you have is something physical. I could take it off you, and then it's something I have. Something you are is hopefully something that I can't take off you. And we'll have a think about that later as well. So let's have a look at these. Something you know. I've already mentioned passwords and PIN numbers. The other things that could be something you know is like a swipe pattern. On Android phones, you've got a swipe unlock. It could even be a secret knock. I still remember when I was a kid, my sister and I would play games at home, and if you didn't get the knock right, you wouldn't be let into your sibling's room and you couldn't play games. That was something we knew. The downside of the things that we know, my clicker works, is you have to remember them. Our brains are really bad at remembering things. How many people in this room remember all of their passwords? If you have your hand up, it's because you only use one password, and we'll have a chat later. You can use a password manager, then you've only got to remember one password, and maybe that's the one that you remember. The other thing you can do is you can write it down, which is not necessarily a very good thing to do for security. How many people here write down any of their passwords? How many people here know of friends or family who write down their passwords? Okay, so at first we had like 10%, and then it went up to 50%. Here's the thing, and this isn't really part of this talk, but writing your passwords down is not actually the worst idea. My mum has 2 sheets of A4 paper with all of her usernames and passwords because she can't remember them all, and she's never going to use a password manager. Her piece of paper is her password manager. With anybody who here uses any password manager? So I could basically get all your passwords if I knew your master password and possibly a secret key. Anybody could find out all of my mum's passwords if they had access to the piece of paper. I think that getting access to that piece of paper might actually be harder than me trying to socially engineer data out of you to get access to your password manager, maybe. So it's not necessarily a bad idea, and there's often memes that go around on Twitter with the password logbook, and everyone laughs at it because it's hilarious and you should never write them down. But it's actually not a bad way of making yourself more secure if you're not the kind of person who's going to use a password manager. But like I say, that's not really part of this talk. It's just me ranting. I do that often. So some of the issues around password usage is that it's subject to surveillance. I could look over your shoulder as you're typing a password in. How many people here have ever been on a train and logged into something on their laptop? There's probably cameras on that train. Did you make sure the camera wasn't looking? Because somebody in a control room somewhere probably has video footage of you typing your password in. Surveillance is an easy way to get access to passwords. Targeting is a different question. but we have to be aware of surveillance. Interception. Most of the time your password is sent over HTTPS, so you're probably okay, but there's still a possibility of some kind of interception to get that password. Social engineering is a really easy way. You phone up the customer services desk at a company and say, look, I'm locked out of my account, can you help me get back in? And they'll ask you some questions, and if you can persuade them that you're actually somebody else, you can get access to their systems. And the other thing is that they're easily digitized. If I manage to get access to a whole lot of passwords, like the Have I Been Pwned database. Has anybody here not heard of the Have I Been Pwned database? Basically a website that's run by another Australian who collects information from people who have found password lists, or from companies who have volunteered password lists that have been known to be breached. And it's a way of you finding out whether or not you have been pwned, which is this term for owned, your password is owned or something. But they're easily digitized, so I could take everybody's password in this room if you're going to give them to me, and I can send them via email to the other side of the world. It transmits very quickly. And the biggest problem is they can be reused. Hands up if you use more than one password. Hands up if you use at least one password on more than one site. Okay, so the people there were some who had their hands up in both of them. If you had your hand up in the second part, if I've got access to one of your systems, then I've suddenly got access to the other one. So we look at multi-factor authentication as a way of securing this more, because even if I had everybody's password in this room, if every system you used had multi-factor authentication, it's just become infinitely harder, maybe not infinitely, a lot harder, exponentially harder for me to break into a system. So we look at something you have. Something you have can be something like a swipe card for getting into a building. This is something you could give me, but it's currently something you have, and it's an extra level of assurance. It's not something you have to remember. You might have to remember to take it with you, but you don't have to remember the data that's stored on the swipe card. That screen has just gone off. It's going to be fun. Oh, it's back. SMS verification is another one. Getting an SMS message with like a six-digit code to log in. It proves that you have the phone. Actually, it proves that you have the SIM card. If I can get the SIM card out of your phone, even if you've got a phone lock, I can put that SIM card into another phone, and I can get access to something you have. And security fobs, things like the press a button and get the 6 digits. They will generate random, cryptographically secure random codes that are almost one-time use only, that allow you to verify that you have access to this fob in your hand, and therefore you can get a bit more assurance that the person who's logging into a system is actually the person who should be logging in. So it proves physical ownership. That's all it proves. Like I say, if I take it, then I have physical ownership. It is harder to clone. A password I can copy and paste. A security fob I can't. But it's not impossible. It's a really good way to assure authentication as a second factor. I wouldn't use this as a primary factor. I wouldn't use the 6-digit code to prove who you are, just that you have a second factor of who you are. If that makes sense. I'll revisit that in a bit as well. One of the vulnerabilities that came around is the SS7 network. Hands up if you've heard of the SS7 network. 2 people. That doesn't surprise me. It's not often talked about, but essentially, so the SS7 network is what every single cell provider or mobile phone company in the world uses to communicate SMSs between companies. So if you SMS somebody who uses the same cell provider as you, then they'll probably route it inside somehow, magically themselves. But if you want to send me an SMS, I'm currently connected to, I don't know, some local cell tower, but my provider is in Australia. So what's going to happen is you send the SMS to your provider then connects to my provider via this SS7 network, and that then sends the message back to me. One of the really annoying things about mobile telephony is that security is really, really, really bad. Essentially, your phone will trust any cell tower that it connects to. There is no verification mechanism. Similarly, the SS7 network has very little security built in. So there have been proof of concepts where researchers have managed to connect their devices to an SS7 network and basically become the recipient of the SMSs destined for you. So it's not really a man-in-the-middle attack as such. It's more like somebody comes in the middle and just rediverts the SMSs to their mobile phone so you never even get them. If they're clever, they'll make sure that a message goes to you as well, so that you're not looking there going, where's my message gone? But they can intercept those. And then we come to something you are. So this is body measurements, characteristics, also known as biometric data. Fingerprints and facial recognition are two of the ones that we're most familiar with. Who here has an iPhone or an Android that'll do fingerprint and or facial recognition? So we all use it already, and we're very happy with that. We have no concerns. Is that correct? Nobody's worried about sticking their facial data into a phone. Good. It's actually not too bad. Retinal scans is one that's probably more seen in the movies than in real life. But it's something that's starting to become more prevalent, especially in really high security environments. You're probably not going to need it to get into your office anytime soon. Voice and handprint are less known about. Voice is becoming a bit more popular. We've got voice recognition, or like the ownership recognition in Siri and what's OK Google's thing called? It's just called Google, right? I don't know. Hey? Google Assistant. The systems will be able to detect whether or not it's you that's talking, but they're not going to use that as an authentication. They're basically using that as a trust factor of whether or not they should listen to what you're saying. My daughter's voice is very similar to my wife's voice, which really annoys her because she can activate Siri whenever she wants. It's great fun to watch. Handprints. Less so. I mean, fingerprint is fairly accurate. Handprints are actually just about as unique as fingerprints. But the problem with handprints is that obviously you need a bigger area for scanning. The hardware is more expensive. Fingerprint seems to be doing the job pretty well. Some really interesting ones are keystroke timing. The way you type on a keyboard is different to the way the person next to you types on the keyboard. The amount of time it takes you to get from one letter to the other is different. If you use your middle finger to hit the J key, and somebody else uses their index finger, it's going to change the way that the keys are pressed and the timings between them. Handwriting is also an interesting one. So the way you write your signature, nobody else can write your signature the same way. Nobody else can write the word hello the same way as you do. They can probably get quite close, but we can use some kind of machine algorithm to work out what the likelihood is of it being you. And of course, every time you write it, it changes as well. So these algorithms not only need to work out how similar it is to somebody else's handwriting, but also how similar it is to the way you wrote it before, because it's going to change slowly over time. And the last one is gait. This is a really fun one. Gait is the way you walk. So when I'm walking, my hips are moving in a certain way, and my shoulders move in a certain way, and I have a certain posture. Some people might move forward with their shoulders. Some people walk more with their hips. Some people have a bit of a limp, and some people have microphones that stop working. So technically, we could use some kind of computer vision to look at the way you walk to work out whether or not you're supposed to be logging into a system. So there are some vulnerabilities with something you are. Chopping off your fingers. There was a case in Japan, I think it was, where a car had a fingerprint scanner for unlocking the door and activating the ignition. And look, I don't know how true it is, but I heard a story about somebody being carjacked, so being stopped at the side of the road or at a traffic light, and thieves wanted to steal the car, but obviously they couldn't start the car because they didn't have his finger. Now, I don't know whether they ran away thinking there's no way I'm cutting his finger off, or whether one of them got a machete out. Could have gone either way. What is easier is actually lifting fingerprints. So if they'd found his fingerprint somewhere else in the car, they could have spent, I don't know, half an hour trying to recreate it somehow. Interestingly, I think it's on the next one, high-resolution photos, I'm skipping ahead already. There's been a proven case where somebody has taken a photo, high enough resolution of a fingerprint, to be able to then use a 3D printer to generate that fingerprint and unlock a system. So if you've ever posted a photo online of, I don't know, the screen of your phone that you've just unlocked with your PIN code, and your fingerprint is highly visible on there, I know I have. I very quickly deleted it again. But we probably have our fingerprints online somewhere already. And if it's high enough resolution, somebody can use that, lift it, and then use it to log into something else. The other thing I'm curious about that I haven't really looked into yet is voice generators. There was a thing that was going around recently where it was like a two videos side by side, and there was some person who you don't know, and then there was Barack Obama. This person was saying some words, and Barack's face was moving in time, and his lips were moving in time, and he was actually saying the words in his own accent, his own voice, even though it was this person over here that we've never seen before. Has anybody else seen that online? A couple of hands? About 30%. So I'm wondering, is technology for imitating other people advanced enough to actually use that to circumvent voice recognition for the purposes of authentication? Because if so, voice recognition has just gone out of the window as a viable extra factor. Now, the good thing is that the software to do this generation of somebody else's voice is actually quite hard to do at the moment. 10 years ago, we all thought that machine learning and artificial intelligence was a dream in the future, and nowadays you can buy it off Microsoft by the hour. How soon until I can start talking like Barack Obama by the hour? Right, so multiple factors of authentication. One of the things we need to look at now is we've looked at the three main factors, is there's a difference between identification and authentication. Identification is working out who it is. Authentication is working out whether or not they should be allowed to do whatever it is they want to do. So on the one hand, you might have some ID that proves that you are Alf the alien. On the other hand, you might have a password that proves that you know the password to log into a system. Now, I mentioned before that some factors are not good for identification, and a password is a perfect example. Hands up here whose password is 123456778. Okay, so you and I have the same password. Mental note, I must change my password. If I logged in with my password, how would the system know that it's not you? So we've got multiple factors, but we have to remember that authentication doesn't necessarily mean identification. We need at least one identifying factor. If you have two identifying factors as part of your multi-factor authentication, if two of them are identifying, then you can increase your confidence in the identity. Because if I log in, if I provide one identifying factor and another that mismatches, then you're going to log me out quickly. So let's have a look at the video again and work out what factors of authentication we've used. So he's walking towards the door. My microphone's on. Hello. Hello? 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 Everything's gone. That's magic. I can just shout louder. So he's gone towards the door, he's got a swipe card. So that's something he has. He's now using the voice recording, which if you've seen the movie is a very interesting way he managed to get that voice recording. But that's something you are, potentially. And then he uses the swipe card again, and that's something that you have. So he's never used something you know. So he had two factors of authentication, the voice, which could potentially be an identifying factor. It's going to be hard unless we're using this AI machine learning system that creates different people's voices for you, or you're my wife and my daughter, who have very similar voices. And we've got the swipe card, which is something you have. There was no something you know. Something you know is going to be harder to get because you've got to get into somebody's brain. So I reckon that given that was supposed to be a really high security system, they wanted to get in to access some computers to steal some data. You'd want to have something you know in there as well. Two factors of authentication are good, three are better. That was rubbish. They should do better. So let's take these theories, these three factors of authentication, and see whether we can use these to secure websites. At the moment, we know that we can use passwords for logging into websites, because we do that every day. Can we use fingerprints for logging into websites? Can we use voice recognition? Can we use gait, the way that I walk? So these are already used. They are one of the three different factors. And here is something we want to work out whether we can. So we already have biometrics in mainstream technology. I asked before if anybody has a Google phone or an Android or an iOS phone that supports fingerprint or face recognition. The interesting thing with the face recognition is that it's actually a 3D face recognition system. I don't know if you've looked into how this works, but rather than just using an image and doing image matching, there's like this, lots of dots of infrared light sprayed onto your face. And there's another camera, or there is a camera, that looks at the way the infrared lies on your face. And because your face is not flat, has anybody got a flat face? Because you're going to have problems. Because your face is not flat, the dots will not be the same distance from each other. And then as you move your head, it can get an idea of the 3D shape of your face. So it's really hard to replicate. There was actually somebody who managed to 3D print his own face and use it to log into his iPhone. So if you want to get into somebody's iPhone, you can do that. It'll only take you 17 hours to print. I don't know how long it took him to actually model his face. So again, the risk is low. So device-based biometrics, if you've got a face or a fingerprint, the question now is this something you have or something you are? Any guesses? It's a fingerprint, right? And it's a face. So it's something I am. Except it's the phone that decides whether or not the face or the fingerprint matches, not the website that you're trying to log into. So from the website's perspective, it's actually something you have. And in fact, the way that these systems work, the way the Face ID works, is that once the iPhone has scanned your face, it then turns into a hardware authenticator, a bit like those fobs that create a 6-digit number. And it will create a securely signed message that said, yes, my version of authentication worked. It doesn't even tell you the website necessarily whether it was face or fingerprint or push notification or whatever technology they want to use to verify you are who you are. If you're using a mechanism for using the biometric security in your phone to authenticate you to your website, the website actually sees you as a hardware authenticator. So it's something you have. Now, the distinction there probably isn't that important, but if you're designing a system where you want to have high security, so you want something you have, something you are, and something you know, and you implement this as the something you are, you're actually making a mistake, and you now have two things that you have, which reduces your security footprint again. Does that make sense? Couple of nods. Stick your hands up at any time if you want to ask questions, or leave them to the end. I think actually probably the end, because you'll want to run around with a microphone. Yeah. All right, so they just proved that you're present. Now there is a new technology, it's about a year old, called WebAuthn. Have you heard of WebAuthn? Couple of hands. It's basically a new technology that's being built into browsers that will allow you to access hardware authenticators on your device. So if you have an application that uses WebAuthn as part of, I don't know, Firefox for example, and you're running it on your Android phone, then it allows you to ask the phone to use its hardware authenticator, the fingerprint or the face, to do an authentication process. It's kind of cool. And it's built into desktops as well. So theoretically, if you have a hardware authenticator like a fingerprint scanner on your laptop, you could use that. One thing we do need to talk about with all of this is passwords are, or there's something you know. They've been around for a while, and there are ways for people to deal with them, even if it's not easy. So entering a password, for example, if you're not able to type, if you've got some kind of physical disability around typing, there are still ways of doing that. We have screen readers that can tell you what you're expecting, and we've got systems that will automatically type the systems in. We've got Braille readers and typers and all sorts. So that the data entry for something you know, it's not perfect for everyone, but we've been dealing with it for a while. How about the something you have or the something you are with the biometrics? One of the issues we have is permanent disabilities. What if you can't hear the prompt to say something for the voice recognition? Or what if you're unable to speak, and therefore you can't actually do the voice recognition part of it? You can also have temporary disabilities. If you're fixing the sink and somebody has just recently cleaned it and there's a whole lot of chemicals in there, and you open up the bend in the pipe and these chemicals splash in your eye, and suddenly you can't see anything with this eye. This eye has been damaged, but that's the one you used for retinal authentication. And suddenly you're locked out of systems because your eye's broken, but only for a short period of time, hopefully. And then environmental. These are things that can happen to any of us any time of day. An example of this is when you've just gone shopping and you've got both hands full and you walk up to your front door and you want to unlock your door. I can't get my keys out, and even if I could, I'm going to struggle to unlock. So I've got to put a bag down, and then suddenly I'm not environmentally disabled anymore. But for that period of time while I'm holding both bags, I'm environmentally disabled. The environment that I'm in at that moment causes me to not be able to do something that I want to do. The other example here is you're skiing and you've got a glove and you can't do your fingerprint. So there are a couple of extra bonus factors. There's something you know, something you have, and something you are ones that a lot of us will probably already have heard of. If not, you've heard of them now. And they're the main three when we talk about multi-factor authentication. But there are a couple of others which you can use as well. Maybe think of any others that might be interesting ways of identifying somebody's character or attributes. Something you do, something you frequently. It would be hard to measure something you do. You can measure where somebody is. You can use, okay, IP addresses are not a good way of identifying location, but they're okay. Similarly, you could actually do like an internal IP address. Are they in the office or connected via a VPN? Maybe that's the way you want to log down access. Another popular one is where what time you're in. Like, are you in the office during office hours? Should you be able to access systems at midnight? You need to take into consideration time zones as well. But you can add these in. And sometimes you'll find that somewhere you are, I haven't even introduced myself. Hi, I'm Ben, I work for Auth0. Auth0 do identity in the cloud, and one of the things we do to make sure that people who are logging in are actually who we think they are is do location-based detection. So if you log in from New York, and then 25 minutes later you log in from Medellin, the likelihood is it's not the same person. You could have just connected via a VPN to New York and then disconnected. In which case, what you can do is you can escalate the authentication process and say, look, it looks like something dodgy is going on. We're going to just do, I don't know, a second level of authentication via SMS or a push notification. But you can use these as ways of enhancing your trust in the fact that who is in front of you at the system they're trying to log in is who they say they are. And it's not two people trying to log in at the same time, or it's not somebody who's managed to crack somebody else's password. So that's me. Like I say, I'm Ben. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I work for Auth0 as a developer advocate. If you do want to talk to me about Auth0, so we basically do the whole login mechanism for you and password management and security, come chat to me in the break or ask me questions now. But if you've got any questions about biometric security, the one that I have been asked before is how you do gate for logging into websites. And it's very easy. All you need to do is set up a webcam on your laptop. And then when it says, please walk away from the laptop, and then walk back to the laptop, and then you just verify whether or not they walk the same way as the person who logged in. It's totally feasible, right? Totally practical. I don't think gate is going to be a login mechanism anytime soon. Thanks for your time. Happy to take questions.